All right, let's get started on the integumentary system. This is arguably the largest organ system in our body. This is what we commonly know as our skin. So, your integumentary system is your skin. And different from what most of us might already think, the integumentary system, because it's an organ, is going to be composed of many types of tissue, not just epithelial tissue. So you're going to have a composition, you're actually going to have all four types of tissue here in the integumentary system. The topmost layer will be made of epithelial tissue. Your secondary layer will be made of mostly different types of connective tissue, including blood vessels and your loose connective tissue and your dense irregular connective tissue, and then your bottommost layer, which is also called your hypodermis, is going to be made mostly out of adipose tissue and areolar tissue. There's going to be many accessory structures within them, including some smooth muscles. So we're going to have the muscular system involved as well. And many different types of nerves are going to be running through your skin. This is why when you touch your skin, it's so sensitive, right? You can feel many things all over your skin because you have so many nerve endings. So all four types of tissue are found in your skin because it is a very important organ system within your body. You cannot live without your skin. So let's look at some of the functions of your integumentary system. The first is the most logical one you can think of. It's going to have an important function for maintaining homeostasis. And the way it helps maintain homeostasis is going to be through protection. Okay. So you can protect your body from physical trauma, from invasion by pathogens, from water loss, etc. It also helps regulate your body temperature, and this is really key in maintaining homeostasis. Regulating your body temperature. So things like your sweat glands that produce sweat to help cool you down when you're too hot, and things like your smooth muscles called erector pili muscles that help induce shivering when you're cold to help warm you up. You're also going to have your blood vessels constricting close to the surface to regulate your blood temperature as well. So there are many ways in which your skin is going to be involved in regulating body temperature. The bottommost layer of their skin, also known as the hypodermis, is full of adipose tissue, which, as you just learned, is a type of fatty tissue. So you can imagine if you have a lot of fat cells in adipose tissue, one of its functions is insulation, then of course, just by having a good layer of fat tissue on the bottommost part of the skin, then you're going to also help regulate the temperature there. Other things that your body's going to do is excretion, and this, which is excretion of waste via sweat. So when you sweat, you're removing water from the body, you're cooling down the body, but along with that water, you are also removing other things like electrolytes are being removed from your body, and other waste can be removed via the sweat. So excretion is important. Sensory input, because as I mentioned, your integument system is going to be full of nerve endings. So therefore, you can do things like detect touch, pressure, pain, temperature, etc. It's also going to be important in storing lipids in those adipocytes that are found in the bottommost layer. And lastly, it's going to be very, very important in synthesizing chemicals. I'm going to talk in more detail about this, okay? There are certain chemicals like melanin, which give your skin color, its actual skin color and tone. The melanin helps protect your skin from UV radiation to avoid things like cancer. It also has keratin, makes keratin, which protects against abrasions and repels water. And it's going to make vitamin D. This is really important because the vitamin D in your body is actually produced by your skin. So, and vitamin D is essential in growing bones because it helps with calcium absorption. All right, so let's look at, so as you see here, the skin is going to have these three main regions. So your epidermis, your dermis, and your hypodermis. And I'm going to highlight them and briefly talk about them. And we're going to go into looking at each one of these layers separately. So your epidermis is your topmost layer of the skin, and it's this thick. Epidermis will maybe thicker in areas called thick skin, which are on the palms of your hand and the soles of your feet, and thinner in areas that are known as thin skin, which is your arms, your legs, pretty much all the rest of your skin, your face, the skin in your face that's covering you. Okay. And so you can see here that topmost layer of the skin, the topmost layer, is your epidermis, and we're going to talk about what that's primarily made out of. The second layer, which I'm going to highlight in blue, is your dermis. And your dermis is the largest portion. It's basically all of this that I'm highlighting in blue is what most of your skin is going to be. It's actually going to be the dermis and not the epidermis, as many people think, right? And then the bottommost layer, known as your hypodermis, and we'll talk about how it's technically not part of your skin. And this is your hypodermis down here. Ooh, that's a poor color because you can't see it. I choose a different color, maybe an orange. No, this dark blue, okay? And this is your hypodermis down here. And so you can see a few things as you're looking at the skin right away. The first thing you should notice is how many different type of accessory structures are in the skin. We have hair, we've got sweat glands, we've got oil glands, we have nerve endings, many nerve endings, tons of blood vessels, lots of different types of nerve endings that are for touch and for pressure. We have smooth muscle called erector pili muscle that is in charge of giving us the goosebumps and helping constrict blood vessels close to the surface, etc. Okay. You will also notice the tippity topmost layer, which we're going to talk about in more detail. This top layer here is made primarily out of epithelial tissue. The dermis, which is here, is made primarily out of areolar tissue and dense irregular tissue. So two types of connective tissue, but you also have a lot of accessory structures within them. And then this last layer here is made primarily out of areolar tissue and adipose tissue or fatty tissue. So a combination of those two. Right, so let's look at each one of these three major regions of the skin in detail. So your epidermis is the tippity topmost layer. It is very thin. And as you saw, if you remember from this image we just looked at, remember that the dermis is going to be the biggest part of your skin. The epidermis is actually the smallest part of your skin, I should say, of the three. So the epidermis is going to consist mostly of epithelial tissue, and the type of epithelial tissue it's going to consist of is stratified squamous epithelium. So remember when we looked at your different types of tissue? Squamous epithelium is the one that looks kind of like a squishy, I always say it looks like a fried egg. It looks squishy like that with the nucleus like this. And so what you have is squishied and squishied. Ooh, that looks cuboidal. Let me erase that. Okay. So you have lots of squishied, but it's multiple layers of squishied. Multiple. When I say multiple, I'm talking something like, and you're going to see it, you saw it under the microscope, you can have a good 20 to 40 layers thick of your stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, so stratified, remember that stratified means multiple layer. Squamous means the squishy looking cells, and it's epithelium because it's epithelial tissue. So that's the kind of tissue we're going to have there. It is important that for each of these layers, you know the major function of each layer, and that you know the major types of tissue found in each layer. In the epidermis, it's going to be the stratified squamous epithelium. Okay. Within the stratified squamous epithelium, we're going to have different types of cells within that. So yes, it is stratified squamous epithelium, but we're also going to have melanocytes. Okay, these are the types of cells that produce melanin. And melanin is what provides your skin with its actual color. So high melanin production of a certain type makes your skin darker. Lower melanin production of a certain type makes your skin look lighter. You are going to be watching a video and doing an assignment on skin color and how it differs depending on the different types of melanin. The important thing for melanin and why we have melanin is it serves as protection from UV light. UV light can cause extreme damage to cells. So in order to protect those cells, we produce melanin, which forms a little umbrella or cap to protect our keratinocytes. The keratinocytes are important cells that are going to be formed, that are going to be within the epidermis, and they produce keratin. Keratin is necessary because it acts as waterproof barrier so that you don't lose excess amounts of water and you're not getting soaked through your body. But those keratinocytes need to protect it, so the melanocytes produce melanin, which then protects the keratinocytes like a little umbrella. We also have dendritic cells, which are a type of phagocytic cells. So they're a white blood cell that actually eats other cells. So it can get rid of worn out cells. It can get rid of pathogens like bacteria or viruses trying to get through the skin. It can get rid of debris if you get a cut or an abrasion. We also have Merkel cells. These are very sensitive touch receptors, and we have many different touch receptors throughout the skin. In the epidermis, mostly Merkel cells are where you're going to find as your sensitive touch receptors. And we're also going to have some cells that are going to convert cholesterol into vitamin D. So as you know, vitamin D is very important to your body. And you've probably all heard this many times, especially may have heard that you need supplements of vitamin D if you're not getting enough sunlight, especially in the winter when you don't tend to go out as much. And the reason for that is because the sunlight hitting your integumentary system causes these cells to start to convert cholesterol into vitamin D. Without enough sunlight, we don't get enough motivation in those cells to convert that cholesterol into vitamin D, and then we could be running low on vitamin D in our body. Vitamin D is extremely important for helping with the storage of calcium, or I should say the absorption of calcium in your body. So calcium needs to be absorbed into your body, and your bones mostly will take care of bringing that calcium, storing that calcium for you, and releasing it when necessary. And calcium is important for many different things. Bone growth is one of those, but also the maintenance of bone. So even if you're past your developmental years, vitamin D is still important because you're constantly wearing away and creating new bone. And this is what's going to help with that creation of bone. All right, so let's look at a little bit further detail the layers of the epidermis. So again, remember that your epidermis is going to be made out of stratified squamous epithelium, and it's going to have 5 layers. Most of your skin, I should clarify, most of the epidermis will actually only have 4 layers thick. This is known as thin skin. The 5th layer, which is the stratum lucidum, okay, is only found in thick skin, so like the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. All the rest are just going to have the stratum corneum, the stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and stratum basale. Okay, here's a nifty little mnemonic to help you remember the 5 layers or stratums. Stratum is another word for layer. The 5 stratums of the epidermis. Come, let's get sunblock. If I'm thick skin, come, let's get sunblock. If I'm thin skin, come, get sunblock. Because remember, the lucidum is only found in the thick skin, right? The stratum corneum is your outermost layer. It's also called the apical layer. So if you remember, your stratified squamous epithelium, because it's epithelial tissue, is going to have an apical layer, which is a free layer. And it's going to have the basement layer, which is the layer that's going to be attached to the underlying connective tissue. So your apical layer, the topmost layer of that stratified squamous epithelium, is going to be your stratum corneum. So you have a lot of stratified squamous epithelium here. This guy, the apical layer, will be stratum corneum, and as you go further down, you go through all these layers. It's going to be composed mostly of dead cells. So you've probably all heard that your skin has lots of dead cells, and you go shedding dead cells every second of the day. That's okay, because you go replacing those cells as well, and that's really important. You don't want the topmost layer to be live cells, because then you'd have to have lots of blood reaching that area, and then every time you scrape yourself or you touch something, you'd risk damaging your blood vessels or getting debris into your body and causing serious damage. So instead, that tippy topmost layer is going to be made out of dead cells to protect you, and they're going to be constantly replaced. The stratum lucidum, again only found in thick skin, is going to be filled with a lot of watery liquid. Okay, the stratum granulosum is your thin layer. Your stratum spinosum is your thickest of the layers in the epidermis, and then you have your stratum basale. The stratum basale, which would be the bottommost layer, is going to be the one that attaches to the basement membrane. So it attaches to that underlying connective tissue. And it's going to be composed of mainly of two types of cells, melanocytes and stem cells. Stem cells are cells that will then grow into new cells like keratinocytes. And melanocytes are those cells that make melanin. Because remember, the melanin needs to be made in order to protect your keratinocytes from UV damage. So let's look here real fast. So this is your epidermis, right? And then in your epidermis, you're going to have, so let me highlight your epidermis for you here in green. Okay. So this tippity topmost layer here is going to be your epidermis. As you can see, it's not a super thick layer. Remember, your skin is mostly going to be composed of the dermis, okay? But the epidermis, which is composed of those 5 layers, let's get sunblock, right? Your corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, and basale. All right. So what happens is your keratinocytes, those cells that are found in the bottommost layer and continue on up through the different layers, they're going to be very highly mitotic, which, if you remember, mitosis is the making of new cells. So keratinocytes make lots of themselves because they need to replace themselves as you go through the layers. So one daughter cell remains in the stratum basale. One daughter cell will migrate up through the different layers until it reaches the tippity topmost layer, that stratum corneum. And when it reaches the tippity topmost layer, it's already dead by then. And that is what is known as a bag of keratin, because it is dead by the time it reaches that. So this is what your entire epidermis looks like. This up here would be your corneum, because we are looking at, let me highlight that better, all of this area is your corneum, because we are looking at the tippity topmost layer. Then we have the lucidum right underneath it, if it's thick skin. If it's thin skin, you're not going to have the lucidum. Right underneath that, you are going to have your granulosum. Okay, that one doesn't highlight there. Let me go back to the green then. Right under that, you're going to have your granulosum, which is pretty thick, and then you're going to have your spinosum. Okay, and then finally you're going to have your basement layer, which is your basale. And your basale is the one that's going to have the mitotic keratinocytes, so those that are going through mitosis. And it's also going to have your melanocytes, the ones that are going to produce melanin. And so basically what happens is, as keratin is made, which is down here, you know that one cell makes 2 cells after it goes through mitosis. One of these cells stays down here to continue to go through mitosis as needed. The other cell will start to travel up through these different layers until reaching the stratum corneum. And as it travels up, it will start to die. So by the time you get to this tippity topmost layer, the stratum corneum, all you're going to have are dead keratinocytes. These guys are dead, and it's known as kind of like a bag full of keratin, because they're chock full of keratin, but they also have melanin to protect them. Okay, and this is what forms that water barrier that your skin has. This is what keeps water and blood and everything else from leaving your body, but also keeps water and other things from getting in. And it's those dead keratinocytes. This is a really great video to watch regarding your amazing skin. And it does a great job of explaining in detail these things that I've just talked about, and gives you a really great view of what your skin actually looks like. So I highly suggest watching this video. Right. The next layer of the skin after this one is your dermis. And I'm going to continue with that on the next video where we're going to talk about the dermis and then hopefully get into the hypodermis.